On the American tour in 1965, the Beatles arrived in Hollywood. We're going to have a few days rest here. We stayed up in a big house up in Benedict Canyon. And after we'd been there 1 or 2 days, suddenly there was a knock on the door one day. And this big man stood at the door with a long white coat on with various things on it and a big fedora. And he came in and he was talking to Brian over in a corner of the room. And the one person that was very excited was Mal Evans, being the big Elvis fan. And there was an arrangement made that the Beatles should go to Elvis's house for a party. It was on, it was off, it was on, it was off. And eventually the day came. Late in the evening, 2 big black limousines arrived with all Elvis's boys in it, known as the Memphis Mafia. We all jumped into the cars. There was the 4 Beatles, there was Brian Epstein, there was Neil, there was Mal, there was myself, 1 or 2 others. And we were driven. We ended up in the big driveway of Elvis's house. We all jumped out of the car. And as usual, I was always the last one. So John, Paul, George, Ringo, everybody went through the doorway with Elvis standing immaculately dressed in his beautiful red shirt, a dark pair of pants, and he greeted everybody as they went through the door. And I'm the last one through the door, and as I get to the door I said to Elvis, "My name's Alf, I'm the Beatles driver, roadie." Grasped me by the hand, "Welcome to my home, sir," pulled me through the door, and in we went. Going through this very large hallway with this huge great fireplace in the middle of the room with a sort of a copper chimney, this lovely wall all around it. We go further through into a lovely sitting room. John, Paul, George, Ringo sat down. There was a couple of TVs, colour TVs on here. They were both going but no sound. And suddenly from nowhere Elvis reaches over the back of him and brings in the guitars and passes one to Paul and to George and to John, and Ringo's at the end of the settee tapping in time to the jamming that was taking place. And we all stood back, and I can picture Brian and the Colonel over in the far corner of the room surveying the situations, and there's us sort of standing there and we're looking, and obviously we're tremendously excited by all this because here we have the Beatles and Elvis, 2 of the biggest things in showbiz. Then as the evening went on, there's all Elvis's people are all dashing around, and drinks and food, children, the wives and girlfriends of all the people working for Elvis. And then we started to drift around different parts of the house, and suddenly Ringo and I were sitting on this wall, as I described a little bit earlier, by this fireplace. We're sitting down there with a glass of scotch and enjoying it, and Elvis is over in the corner throwing dice with the other boys. And Elvis's people are still dashing around, trays of drinks, etc. And I nudge Ringo and I say to him, "Richie, there's something I don't quite understand here. Elvis is one man, and he's got about 12 guys all running around looking after his every need and taking care of all the guests, etc. I said, "You are 4, and there are just 3 of us looking after you." So there is a pause. Richie looks at me, a little smile on his face. "What do you want, Alf? A raise?" So we smiled about that, and it went off. After 4 or 5 hours, gradually it was time for us to leave, and Elvis said farewell to all of us at the door, and we climbed into the limousines, and away we went. The very next day, early evening time, 2 limousines arrived, again in this house in Benedict Canyon, and Elvis had sent his roadies to take out the Beatles roadies for a night on the town. So we all jump into the limousines. We go off, we go to all these beautiful clubs, they entertain us for dinner, they take us to jazz clubs, different places for music. And it was a bit special for us because this was sort of Elvis with his roadies repaying a kindness to the Beatles roadies. But the sad thing for me to say about this is that there was no photographs taken, there was no tapes made of the jamming, of the session, there was nothing took place. So the only recollection we have is the few of us that were actually there, is that we have this beautiful memory in our minds and in our hearts. And it's something that I'm happy to relate to you, because it was an evening that we enjoyed tremendously.